was Susan B. Anthony against black people voting? Now you may have seen this quote floating around and it does look pretty bad, but the context is really important here. See, Susan B. Anthony was for universal suffrage. She helped form the American Equal Rights Association with Frederick Douglass. However, Frederick Douglass ended up pivoting, wanting to first focus on the 15th Amendment, which would give black men the vote. Now, many suffragettes saw this as a betrayal and thought it would push back the women's rights movement, as it would constitutionally verify the idea that men were superior to women. And allegedly, said quote was her response when she was asked to set aside women's voting rights. Now, you could argue Anthony was so stubborn about women's suffrage, she did not allow herself to see the perspective of black people who were concerned for their safety, especially in former slave states, and desperately wanted to get black men voting in order to pass protection laws. This discussion ended up causing a rift in the organization, and Susan B. Anthony, along with some other suffragettes, ended up splitting off. What should be noted is that black suffragettes were often left behind in these discussions, as it was often between who should get the vote, white women or black men. Now, what a lot of articles I've read leave off is that they imply that Susan B. Anthony and Frederick Douglass never made up, and henceforth Susan B. Anthony only campaigned for the rights of white women. And this is not true. They had a close bond from a young age, both participating in the abolitionist movement and campaigning against slavery. And though there was tension between them for a period of time, they did rekindle their friendship. They were seen together in universal suffrage organizations, and when the news of him passed, Anthony was devastated and immediately rushed to his wife to help plan the funeral and delivered a eulogy. She also had a very close relationship with Hester C. Jeffrey, who delivered a eulogy at her funeral and created the first Susan B. Anthony Memorial. Now, beyond suffrage, Susan B. Anthony was a huge advocate for full equity and equality for all people, and her views on integration were considered very progressive for the time. Now, with that being said, Susan B. Anthony was not a perfect person and didn't always go about her ideals the right way. For example, she worked with a racist publisher in order to get a column where she could advocate for women's rights. Susan B. Anthony was a very busy woman. There is a lot to be said about this topic, but just remember, whenever you see a tweet, make sure to do a little research before you just take it as truth.